Klipsch the 5s. Who are these for? If you're looking for a soundbar replacement, this is for you. If you're looking for a pair of speakers that you can use in a small to mid-sized room, possibly without a subwoofer, these are for you. If you're looking to use these at your desk, you may be able to do that, but with a small caveat, which I'll talk about later. Alright, so I'm going to start off with first doing an overview of all the things that I like, a brief rundown, and then some more details about the functions and features of these pair of speakers. Afterwards, I'll do a measurement using REW. Then we're going to move on to the speaker leaderboard, which we always do, and a sound demo, which you guys have been asking me for a very long time. This time it's going to be a little different because it's going to be a binaural sound demo. So you're going to be able to hear how it sounds to me in these different listening positions. So one will be here at my desk and another one will be in the living room. At the very end, I'm going to talk about a few of the things that I don't like. So getting the price out of the way, these are $799, and that is not the least expensive speaker, but I'm going to tell you the reasons why I think it's worth it. And first of all, I'm going to start off with the build quality. If you look at these things, these are made out of real wood veneer, which is very rare in this price range. And so it looks very nice. There's textures everywhere. So if you look around this thing, there's a texture on the front, which they didn't really have to do. And so it's a nice blend on the bottom. They have cork to keep it from sliding around. They could have used a cheaper material, but cork, it just fits the overall aesthetic. And so you can see that they really took those things into account. And look at these grills. So these look good even with the grills on, although I prefer the way they sound without them. But if you have to keep them on, you can do that and they'll still look good. And of course, we have to talk about the knobs. So you know it's all about that knob feel. The knobs on these, they do look very nice. They have a nice feel to them. They are made out of aluminum, and so there's some weightiness, and you can feel a little bit of a click when you move them. So I was hoping there'd be a little bit more resistance there. Although it does feel nice, there's just a little bit more, like I just wish it was a little bit harder to push. Kind of weird, I know. The other thing about these is that the light, the LED, is very useful on here. It tells you exactly where the volume is. So there's one strip of LEDs across the inputs, and when you move the volume slider up and down, then it changes the LEDs on there accordingly. After a while, it'll turn off, and then you'll be able to see what input selection you are on. And so that's a dual purpose. And also when you mute it, it also blinks. And so it notifies you a few different things. It's very intuitive and easy to use. Now, again, looking at the textured front, you might think that this right here is an LED light, and it actually isn't. It's the IR blaster for the remote. And so initially when I did the unboxing, I thought that that was what it was, but it isn't. Another thing to notice here is that the tweeter, if you look very closely, it has a little kind of like a phase plug, I guess, but it's very pointy. So if you don't want your kids poking the tweeter in, which has happened to me a few times, well, they're gonna not really want to poke that in because it's gonna poke them back. So as far as features, this has a ton of them. Connectivity wise, it has Bluetooth. It has an analog line input, which are RCAs, which also double as the phono input. So if you have a turntable, you can use this. There's a switch on the back for you to switch between the two. Has an optical. It can be used as a DAC, so it has USB if you want to connect it directly to your computer. It has a remote control, which is handy because, as I'll talk about later, you can use this with a sub, and it has controls, so you can actually change the volume on the sub independently as well from the remote. You'll be able to switch which speaker is the active speaker, whether it's left or right, depending on where your power plug is, or whatever's convenient for you. And most importantly, this has HDMI ARC. HDMI ARC. Has HDMI ARC. Now, why is that important? It's extremely important. This is something I've been asking companies to do for a long time, and Klipsch has listened. And it's because with HDMI ARC, you're able to connect this to your TV, and ARC stands for audio return channel. So what'll happen is you plug in all your sources to your TV, and all of the sound gets played automatically through these speakers. Now that's cool and all, but the other additional feature is that you can use one remote and control the volume on these speakers. And that's very handy. You don't actually have to even use this remote after you set it up, except maybe to change the levels on the sub, like I stated earlier. But we all have too many remotes as is, so it's nice to not have to use another one. And it's very handy. Once you turn on your TV, it turns on the speakers. You turn off the TV, it turns off the speakers. Volume control, mute, everything can be done there. If you need to change input sources, you can use the remote or you can use the knob on top. So this is using the same tweeter as the RP600M, and that's a good thing because a lot of people did like the sound of the RP600Ms because the tweeter was not as harsh as some of the previous models from Klipsch. So Klipsch, as you know, they're using these horn drivers, and a lot of times that can sound harsh if it's not set up properly. The 1-inch titanium tweeter on this has a beast magnet that you wouldn't expect from a tweeter. You might see it on a mid-range or woofer, but this is on the tweeter. It's amazing. And what it does really well is it projects the sound outwards. So it's very hard to describe, but it's partially the driver and partially the horn and the way that they work together. But yeah, the one thing I noticed that these do that other speakers don't typically do is it really throws out the top end. It's hard to describe, but almost to the point where I was noticing that it was very directive and it was almost like bouncing sounds off the back of the walls, whereas typically the sounds that are reflecting off the back walls are more diffuse than what I'm used to hearing on these. So kind of cool, and I think that's kind of the Klipsch sound. So Klipsch has also used a lot of DSP, digital signal processing, to enhance the sound of the speaker. One of the ways that they did that was something that they call dynamic bass EQ, which changes the level of the bass depending on how loud you actually have the speakers. And this is handy because at lower volumes, typically you're able to hear the mid-range and vocals. You can hear that fine, but the bass just kind of goes away. This helps compensate for that. Now, if you don't like that and you just want a flat response the whole way through, then you can hold the subwoofer reset button and it actually resets that to flat, and you don't have that functionality anymore. Klipsch recommends that you set your source to the maximum volume because the way that it's set is it's depending on how loud the volume is on the fives. And so if you have the volume set very low on your source, then it doesn't know, and you're turning it all the way up and it might compensate in the wrong ways. And so it's just something that Klipsch recommends. What I found is that it is possible to get digital clipping if you have your source turned up too high. So be careful of that. Make sure that at certain volumes, when it gets really loud, that you don't hear any crunchiness, because that might mean that your source is too loud. So that's a possibility. Just get it as loud as possible without it actually clipping. The other way that they use DSP is for the crossover. So now that it has DSP, it's an active crossover. They don't have to spend a ton of money on the crossover components. And it's one of the complaints with the RP600Ms that there was a dip that I've measured, and people have found ways to fix that using more expensive components. But now that problem is solved. They're using DSP to make the ideal crossover. Now, soundstage and imaging was very good on these. I think the directive tweeter has a lot to do with that. I found that the best placement is to have your ear level right in between where the tweeter and the woofer is. So right in between that point is the best location. I found that it's best pointed directly at me, and I'll explain a little bit more why that is. But yeah, I found the soundstage and imaging good, which is very helpful because I know people have asked, well, if you have two speakers, what happened to the center channel? I mean, aren't you guys always saying how important that is? Yes, these do a good job of providing a phantom center image, meaning it sounds like you have a center speaker. And so that's important. These do that very well. And yet another use of DSP is it allows these to play as loud as possible without distortion. So it knows when it's distorting, it backs it off, and it doesn't allow you to overdrive the speakers. They claim a maximum dB of 109 decibels from 1 meter, 3 feet away. And so that is really, really loud. It's also clean because they're biamping it. So the woofer gets 60 watts, the tweeter gets 20 watts, and that's for each speaker. So there's 4 separate amps in here. That's pretty awesome for something in this price category. And that's why you'll notice with a wire in the back, there's actually a proprietary cable because it needs to provide 4 wires. So plus and minus for the woofer, plus and minus for the tweeter. Now the bass is very surprising considering that's a 4.5 inch fiber composite woofer. 4.5 inches. Is that why they call it the fives? Because they're rounding up and calling it the fives? I know that the sixes use a 6-inch woofer. I don't know. But I was very amazed by how small this was and how much bass was actually coming out of this. I think it all comes down to the DSP tuning, as well as the tuning of the box and the port, etc. But yeah, this gets really low, and that's, again, they call dynamic bass EQ. That's partially for the loudness compensation that they're doing. But I think another thing that I noticed that they're doing is they're also allowing the speaker to play as low as possible at lower volumes. So up to a certain point, I think it was around 35%, you get the maximum bass output. As far as low frequency response, it's able to produce lows that a speaker this size shouldn't be able to produce. And it is able to do it in a clean fashion thanks to DSP. Now, I've always said that you can make any speaker play 20 hertz, but at what volume? And so that's what's so cool about this, is at lower volumes, it's able to produce those lower frequencies, right? And when you start turning it up, then it starts to limit the amount of low frequency extension so that it doesn't distort, but now you can play it louder. The other awesome thing is that these do allow you to connect a sub, and when you do, it applies a high pass crossover to the speakers, which allows you to play them even louder. And so that's amazing. And basically it's taking the bass away from the speakers so the overall system can play louder. So that high pass capability is not typical in most systems. So a lot of times you'll find that powered speakers allow you to connect a sub, but the speakers don't do anything different. They're just going to stay as they are. It doesn't really help you get more dynamics out of those speakers. And so this does. I'm glad they did that. One thing I'm really excited about is that they do have a Klipsch Connect app for Android and iOS. And the thing about it is it allows you to do updates to the firmware. What I've read somewhere is that they are possibly going to enable you to set your own EQ, which is handy, and also have a setting so you can do room EQ or room correction. That's something that's typical on AVRs, not something like this in this price range. Once that happens, I'm gonna have to recommend these because that's just awesome. So I'm very excited at the possibilities. We'll have to wait and see if that actually happens. All right, so let's get into the measurements for the fives. So right here, we're taking a look at the Klipsch, the fives. And so this is the measurement from the front. And you can see here the general shape of it. I also measured the port here. And so theoretically, near field, you'd get something kind of like that, right? And so you can see it's there's a bass bump here, and then it's downward sloping and pretty consistent throughout the mid-range and the treble. And so if you look at this, this is not typical of what you'd normally see with a Klipsch speaker. When I reviewed the RP600Ms, the actual treble response was slightly rising here. You know, very dynamic, but some people would consider that maybe bright. And so they went with a different approach here, and so that's very surprising. One thing that I did notice because of this is that I liked to listen to the speaker on axis, meaning the tweeter pointed directly at my ears, because the more you turn it off axis, basically the lower the treble is here. So I actually tested it with the grill on versus the grill off. All right, so here are two measurements with the grill on. Let me kind of overlay this over this other one here. All right, so if I overlay this other one over here, you can see that it did make some changes here to the response. So around 3 kilohertz and slightly above it. When it's near a wall, it was almost too bassy. So here it is with loudness compensation, the green one here. And you'll notice that the bass is far more extended, but that is the part that also is enhanced when you have it near a wall. So instead of looking like this, the bass was actually like, you know, real up. So it was better for me to keep the loudness off in that scenario, but almost to the point where it wasn't low enough. Like I wish that it could have been a little bit lower. And so hopefully their app will allow us to do that in the future. All right, so as you'll notice, here's the RP600M right here. And the top end above 3 kilohertz is the same because it's the same tweeter. But one thing that people complained about is that there was this dip around 1.5 kilohertz on the RP600Ms, which was fixed. Some people did it with higher end components, but the cost of the components was extremely high compared to the price of the speaker. And so they did have to make sacrifices. But now that they're using DSP, they're able to apply any type of crossover because it's active. And so you can tell here that the green line
the 5s are much smoother across the crossover frequency. So like we said before, the 5s have dynamic EQ, which changes the bass based on volume. So when I have it low, I have no loudness on here, and you see that it starts to roll off right here below 100 hertz, right? So RP600M, I'll just keep those up because they're a much larger speaker. But look what happens when I turn on loudness and I have it at a low 65 decibels. Look at how flat that is in comparison. This would actually seem like it extends further than the RP600Ms because of DSP. So let me go ahead and get the RP600Ms out of the way so you can see how this is actually working. So loudness at 65, loudness at 75, loudness at 85 decibels, and loudness at 95 decibels. And so what you'll notice is the louder that you go with these, the more this rolls off, which is what you expect, right? So this is extending the bass frequencies out, but it can't sustain that at extremely loud volumes, right? But at respectable, volumes that you'd normally listen to in your room, yeah, you're still getting bass extension pretty far out. Let's take a look over here at 85 decibels, right? So 85 right here. And then so minus 3 dB is right somewhere around there. So we're at 44.6 hertz, which is not bad. So that's a reasonable volume in a room. And so you can see exactly what the bass EQ is doing there. So keep in mind that that wasn't including the port. That's just from the front. And if you remember, I measure the front like this, right? So theoretically, because this is in room, so my measurements aren't perfect and it is near field, the minus 3 dB point was right here around 32.4 hertz, which is crazy. But keep in mind, this is taking into account near field with the port. And so this is the optimal listening with loudness on. The takeaway is not so much that this is a speaker that, can hit crazy lows, although it can at certain volumes. The point is that they've been able to utilize DSP to be able to play lower bass notes with a speaker that's much smaller and typically couldn't play those notes at a reasonable volume. So this is able to change based on your volume, your listening. And so very good on them for making the most out of the technology that they have available to them.
All right, that's pretty amazing what these speakers can do, right? That's DSP right there. That's engineering. Great job, Klipsch. Now let's put these on the speaker leaderboard and see where they place compared to all the other speakers that I've reviewed in the past.
So here we are, speaker leaderboard, and we're taking a look at the Klipsch, the 5s, and these fit in a few different categories. The first one is powered speakers. I mean, if it was soundbar, it would just annihilate all these, so lucky for those guys. But for powered speakers, are they better than the ELAC Navis? So these are about $2,000 around there. The Vanitude Transparent One Encores, Dynas, Kanto Tux, Totemkin plays. I would say better as far as sound quality. I don't think that they're better than the ARB51s. I mean, those are pretty beast. But as far as functionality, these don't have HDMI ARC. They don't have a lot of the functions that these do. I think I'm gonna put them right below these, but I would say if they update that app, it might be possible for these to be higher. It's that crazy. All right, best bookshelf speaker. Are they better than these and the ELAC debut reference, the Q Acoustics, RP600M? So these are all more capable speakers because they're bigger speakers, right? But they're only more capable if you pair them up with a proper amp or something with the ability to tweak the settings, right? So you're gonna need to adjust these for your room. Otherwise, if you have them near a wall, they might not sound as good. So ideally, in ideal optimal situations, these have the capabilities of sounding better than the 5s, right? So put them both in the same exact perfect scenario, these will outperform the 5s. Let's see, where will they place? I'm gonna have to take into account the functionality too, though, right? So it's not just, it's the overall package. So for around the same price, I can get these ELAC debut reference, but these can do so much more. So because of that, best bookshelf.
this is really tough because there's so many factors, right? These are better sound quality wise, potentially, but functionality and how they sound out of the box, these are already very good. So it depends on who it's for. Man, this is gonna be tough. I'm gonna just go ahead and place these. I really want to put them here. I know that that's upsetting for the people who would buy these because that, you know, man, this is tough. I'm gonna, you know what? So I'm gonna put them here above these. Yeah, that's good. I'm comfortable with them there because even with all kinds of DSP, it's tough for any of these to sound better than the 5. So I'd say functionality, everything put into place, that's where they land. Now, as far as on the desktop, we have the Hercules Monitor 5s. Those were what I was using before. The LP6s, the Vanitude Transparent One Encores. I think that these functionality wise are capable at a desk. I just like the Hercules a little bit better just because they have volume control in the front. They do have some of the functions that you would want. They have a 1/4 inch input that connects directly with my interface. And so they're made specifically for a desk. And so just because of that, they do outperform these at a desk. They have a shelving filter in case you have them near a wall. So that's why they would win. Now the LP6s, the Kali Audios, they had a little too much hiss for me. The Vanitudes also have a little bit of a hiss. Although these are all very, very top contenders, right? These are all up there. All right, so these come in at $799 currently. So under $1,000, where do they place? I'm gonna put them. So this, if I had to stay consistent, I should put them here. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and do this. I'm gonna be controversial. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put them above the ELAC Debut reference because there's so much technology built into these, and you can't ignore that. How are you gonna ignore that, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and change this up. You know, because that's really not fair if you just consider how these perform without an amp, because they do have an amp, right? So taking all that in consideration, I'm gonna go ahead and put them up here above the ELAC Debut reference. I know. And then finally, last but not least, best overall sound quality regardless of price. So regardless of price, which one sounds the best? I guess you have to say amplified, right? With an amp, which one has the potential to sound the best? I would say I'm gonna put these right. This is the Dynas still have more bass, but I would say that right here is fair. Really high up there. So there you go. The Klipsch, the 5s.
All right, so there you have it. I've tried these speakers at my desk and in my living room. I try to use them in different scenarios. And so you'll get a chance to hear it near field and far field in the sound demo here. And so right now I'm using something different. Before I used to do near field recordings. Right now I'm gonna actually use a binaural head to let you know how it sounds to me, to just kind of give you an idea what I'm using and what I'm hearing when I'm evaluating these speakers. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you're wearing headphones in your monitors. You know, it's not gonna be the same if you're listening through speakers, although that's okay. If you're listening to a phone or a bad source, well, you're not gonna get the full effect. So if you get a chance, use some good headphones. All right, so here we go. I'm standing in front of you right now, and so it should sound like that. And if I move over to your left, I'm over here, and you should hear that. Move over to this side. So yeah, check this out. Make sure to use headphones or in-ear monitors, not through your phone. And yeah, let me just sit over here, pull up a seat next to you, and let's check out some of these tunes.
so drunk. I've never seen you clearer than now. We're flying high, floating somewhere up in the clouds. We're going out of ourselves, can we feel it? Almost like I don't know if it's real. Cause when we're doing our thing, we're the wheels that won't stop turning. So take me on a trip, now. Trip. Oh, flick the switch, kill the lights. Oh, wasted. City lights are shining so bright. All these empty faces, we don't care about them tonight. We're going out of ourselves, can you feel it? Almost like I don't know if it's real. Cause when we're doing our thing, we're the wheels that don't stop turning. I know we're acting stupid, being dumb, maybe just a little bit foolish. But I feel so young, just go a little crazy and lose it. I don't care if we're dumb, it's the only way we know how to do it. You make me feel so young.
Here to distinguish among the millions of sounds around us. If for any reason you're
All right, so there you have it. What did you guys think? Now I do have to talk about some of the things that I didn't like. And it's a short list and I'm kind of nitpicking, but to be fair, no product is perfect, no speaker is perfect. And so I'm gonna have to point out some of these flaws. So one thing is that they did use the bass EQ to account for the differences in how we hear at low volumes versus medium to high volumes. And so that's called the equal loudness contour curve, also known as the Fletcher-Munson curve. You've heard me talk about that before. They've done the bass part, but they didn't do the treble part. So you also have a harder time hearing treble when it comes to lower volumes. They compensated for the bass, but not the treble. I'm not sure exactly why, but something to look at. I noticed that for me, the remote was a little bit sluggish to get the inputs once in a while. And so I'm not sure if maybe that was just my setup. I also noticed that it interfered with one of my other remotes and it had the same functions. So kind of weird. So maybe it's just me. The other thing is that there's no visual input. So when I'm pressing volume up and it's taking a while to respond, I just keep pressing up and all of a sudden it might jump up. Maybe it's the device that I'm using that's kind of lagging, but you know, it's just something that I have to let you guys know of. I kind of wish, like I was saying earlier, that the IR blaster on the front, I wish that was actually the LED or some kind of indicator on the front that would tell me the volume, right? And so that would be handy to let me know that at least it's registering the input. Now, of course, if you're using HDMI ARC, that doesn't really matter because usually your TV will have an on-screen indicator of the volume. It just so happens that you might need that if you're using Bluetooth or analog or optical, one of the other input sources. Now, at the very beginning of the video, I said that you can use these at your desk, and that's the way I have it set up right now. One of the issues that I found there is that with most amps that I've found, even studio monitors that I've reviewed, there is an audible hiss, which you can hear. Now, it's not louder than some of the other speakers that I've reviewed before. I've actually reviewed studio monitors that are made for near field listening that have a higher noise floor than these, except the one thing I did notice is that ability for these to project sound, well, it's able to project the hiss also. And so it might not be ideal. And for a lot of people, they might not even notice. It's just something I'm very sensitive to because my area here is very quiet at night. And so it's something that I would just consider and see if that's something that you would care about. Otherwise, I think for most people, they wouldn't care so much. So another nitpick is, although the knobs are awesome, you're able to change things on the speaker itself without the remote. If they're in a place where you have young kids and they're able to reach it, it might be something that they're gonna actually change. So, you know, I know that's the case for me. Something to consider. And the other thing is that the app right now, as we speak, is still not very functional. So I used it to update the firmware on the speaker. It did take me a few tries to get that right. And finally I was able to do it, but there is actually no functionality there yet. I was able to register the speaker. That's about it. So no EQ, no functionality, just a promise of things to come. And so another thing that I noticed is when I'm using these near wall, it's almost too much bass, right? On a desk, when I'm in my living room, when they're near a wall, too much bass. And I would like the option to be able to turn it down. So I found myself turning off the dynamic bass EQ and keeping it flat, but still it wasn't really enough. I needed to actually turn it down more because of the room gain. And so maybe with the promise of EQ in the future and the room EQ possibilities, maybe that's something that they'll be able to fix using the app. So I'm excited and I'm hopeful. Klipsch, please do that ASAP. And so that's pretty much it. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you for supporting me and allowing me to do what I love to do here on YouTube. So if you're interested in becoming a patron, patreon.com/Joe and Tell. I think what I'm planning on doing in the future is selling the stuff that I'm not using, stuff I've reviewed, stuff I've bought for, I don't know, half off to my patrons. So whoever's the first to get something, then, you know, you're the buyer. I'll ship it out to you. You pay for shipping. So let me know if that sounds good to you guys. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.